The 1964 mutiny of the armies of Tanganyika, Uganda and Kenya after independence was one aspect of history that is not talked about. One such mutiny had taken place in Kenya when the Sudanese contingent of the King African Rifles mutinied. This mutiny occurred in 1897 on the date of 23rd September. It involved the Nubian soldiers serving in the King African Rifles. They demanded better pay, clothes, and even wanted their wives to travel with them. They arrested the district commissioner, Captain Bagnao. In the end, the British colonial authorities acceded to their request for higher salaries. Long before Kenya's independence, it occurred in Tanganyika, Uganda, and Kenya in 1964. First, it was the men of the 1st Battalion Tanganyika Rifles, based at Kolito barracks, who caused problems. They were followed by men of the 2nd Battalion Tanganyika Rifles, based at Tabora, together with a company at Nachingwea. They seized the barracks and any British soldiers they could lay their hands on. In an arrangement made by Oscar Kambona, the Minister for Defense and External Affairs, British soldiers were lifted to London through Nairobi. Kambona was taking orders from Sergeant Hingo, a veteran of Second World War. British commander of the Tanganyika soldiers, Brigadier Sholto, took cover at the British High Commissioner in Dar es Salaam. Dr. Nyerere and his Vice President Phaumi Kawawa hid at Magogoni. The situation in Tanzania was made worse by Dr. Nyerere appearing in the streets to inspect damage on shops and private property made by soldiers. Later, the mutiny spread to soldiers of the 1st Battalion Ugandan Rifles based in Jinja. They confined the Defense Minister, Felix Onama, at the quarter guard until the government made concessions and agreed to improve salaries and promote officers. In Kenya, the mutiny of the army was foreseen as early as 1961. Mr. Oginga Odinga, the father of Raila Odinga, and a one-time member of LEGCO, brought up the issue of poor pay for the military when he warned that trouble was looming if the matter was not addressed. This was addressed when a pay rise was introduced in January 1962. However, this was not enough to reduce grievances. It should be noted that the East African Army shared a signal system. That is the old system of communication using signals. The army command across East Africa was under a British Major General who was based in Nairobi by the name of Ian Freeland. This is how information spread out. However, the role of Captain Elisha Kavana, when he was a lieutenant, has come to the fore. Kavana, a star student at Tabora Boys and later Alliance High School in Tanzania, joined Makerere University where he studied in both Makerere and London University. He was the most educated soldier in the Tanganyika Army. It is said that during his holidays, he had visited major barracks in Uganda, Kenya, and Tanganyika and talked to soldiers about the state of affairs, which included poor pay and promotion. Kavana was also a student of Oscar Kambona while at Tabora Boys Secondary School. The only military barracks that was affected in Kenya was the 11th Battalion Kenya Rifles based in Lanet, Nakuru. The oldest military barracks in Kenya and was started in 1882 under the name of Fort Guilford. The men of Lanet barracks caused much trouble through bickering and complaints. Trouble came at a time when most of the Kenyan soldiers were fighting against the shifter menace in northern, northeast, and coastal areas of Kenya. In line with what was happening in Uganda, the soldiers expected the Kenya government to agree to a hefty pay rise and changes in army structure. In Kenya, the army command structure favored British soldiers. They comprised 50% of the commissioned and non-commissioned officers. By the time the crisis reached peak level, between 20th and 24th of January 1964, President Nyerere of Tanganyika, Prime Minister Obote of Uganda, and Prime Minister Kenyatta had agreed that the British government should be approached to send troops. On 24th January 1964, Lieutenant Colonel Steed, commanding officer of Kenya Rifles, Lanet, held a meeting to end tension. On Friday, 24th January 1964, the soldiers gathered to hear a broadcast by Prime Minister Jomo Kenyatta and hoped that he would increase pay rise for the army. Army grievances in Kenya was handled by Major General Ian Freeland and Major Mulinge, later General Mulinge. In response to Kenyatta not announcing anything to do with the grievances, the men of the 11th Battalion, Lanet barracks, in great anger and great show of insubordination, broke into Lanet Armory and organized a protest. This time, Prime Minister Kenyatta, on behalf of President Nyerere and Prime Minister Obote, had contacted the British government under the Prime Minister Douglas Home. The soldiers under Lieutenant Colonel Victory, the commanding officer of the 3rd Regiment of the British Horse Artillery based at Gilgil, sent a force to Lanet barracks. They surrounded the barracks and set out to separate the rebellious soldiers from non-rebellious soldiers. This was on 25th January 1964. Despite warnings, the askaris of the A Company, Lanet barracks, refused to surrender, insisted on negotiations. Jomo Kenyatta took a hard stance and refused any negotiations with rebellious soldiers. Most of the askaris surrendered. 20 askaris to their guns and attempted to escape, but were overpowered. Soldiers were grouped into threes. 99 were categorized as red, 158 as yellow, 340 as green. The entire 11th Battalion Kenya Rifles was disbanded. 140 officers of the green category were allowed to rejoin the 1st Battalion Kenya Rifles, which moved to Nanyuki. The 9 officers who were labeled red were court-martialed under Kenya Military Forces Act. 6 of these were private, and most of them had served for less than 7 years. The court-martial was done in the month of April and May in an open ground. Colonel Joseph Ndolo, one of the senior officers in the army, was the president of the court. The mutineer soldiers were defended by a lawyer by the name of Georgiadis. Sentences from 5 to 14 years imprisonment. Because of this, that Kenya established a defense agreement with Britain. It should be noted that 2,500 British soldiers were mobilized in the exercise, which also involved actions in Uganda and Tanganyika. During the crisis, the American warships in the Red Sea were directed towards the coast of East Africa. Later, Nyerere disbanded the Tanganyika army. He called in the Nigerian army in what was known as the Nigerian battalion to assist with army reorganization. In Uganda, most of the mutineers were pardoned. This act may have led to a lot of indiscipline and instability in the Ugandan army. Please subscribe, comment, and give a like.